You ready? Ready. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and start. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. This is devICT for July 28th. So just first, I want to do a little bit about us. So for those who are new, we have new faces, which is great. We're a program that's part of MakeICT, which is our larger organization. If you're not familiar with them, you should definitely check them out, makeict.org. We're a community for developers. That's all kinds of software developers, not just web or not just mobile or desktop or mainframe or whatever. Our mission is to educate, empower, and connect software developers in the Wichita area. We do have a code of conduct that we take pretty seriously. We're dedicated to a safe and harassment-free experience for everyone. So if you have any problems or any questions, please come talk to myself or Seth. I want to talk really quickly about a few ways you can be involved with devICT. The #1 best way is to chat on our Slack team. There's people on there every day, and you can get an invite if you go to devict.org. There's a link at the top. You can put in your email address, agree to the code of conduct, and you get an invite. Another way is to be involved is to watch past presentations on that same website. This is being recorded, and all of our previous presentations are recorded and up there for you to go review whenever you want. We have a jobs board. It doesn't get a lot of traffic, but it gets Wichita-specific jobs, so it's worth looking at from time to time if you have a job to post or if you're looking for a job. Another way to be involved is to donate. Membership in our organization is free, and almost all of our events are always free. But we do have some monthly costs for the meetup group that we use to attract new members, hosting for some of our sites and servers, our membership here to host events. When we pay for food at events, that's a big cost. So our costs run around $120 to maybe even as much as $300 a month if we have a lot of events and buy a lot of food. We rely on donations, and right now we have recurring monthly donations around $80. So we run at a loss every month. So occasionally we'll get some big donations, which are great, and we're positive right now, but if anyone else felt so inclined, there's 2 ways to set up recurring donations. They're on our website, devict.org, and then also we have a Patreon account. Another great way to be involved is to give a talk. This is a great way to learn about a topic that you're interested in. When you commit to speaking about something for 30+ minutes in front of a group of maybe 30 people, that's a good motivator to really learn about that thing. So for some people, that's a great motivator. Anything related to software development is appropriate. And some people will also like to practice their presentations at groups like this and refine them and improve them and then go pitch them to larger regional or national or international conferences. Quick shout out for some of our friends. I mentioned before MakeICT, Wichita's maker community. There's also Women Who Code. We're friends with them. They are a software development group for women in Wichita. There's Open Wichita, which is the civic open data and civic hacking group. They're doing a lot of cool stuff. Wichita State has a Linux users group. You don't have to be a Wichita State student to attend. There's Startup Wichita and Shocker Startup, which are 2 startup and entrepreneurial-based groups. And then Wichita, which is like a Ignite lightning talk kind of event that happens, I think, quarterly about that. So some upcoming events. We have an event that we run every other Monday called Level Up. The idea is to use this time to learn to code. It's a few hours in the evening. Pizza's usually provided in a dedicated time and space where you can go and work on something that you've been trying to learn with people available to ask questions. So we do that every other Monday. The next one will be August 1st, then the 15th and the 29th. And that's at the MakeICT Makerspace on Douglas, next to what used to be the Big Dog building. Another event we have is Code and Coffee. This is every Thursday morning here at the Labor Party starting at 7 a.m. But you don't have to be here at 7 a.m. The idea is to come and do some work on some like personal projects or something before you go to day job. So that's a lot of fun, pretty casual, kind of open house format. We do a monthly just hangout social event every second Tuesday. So that's here, and that would be August 9th. We've been theming the events for 2016. We had like a board game night, like a coloring night. That was fun. I have a feeling that the theme this month might be Pokemon Go. That hasn't been confirmed though. We have a new recurring event that started called Java Talks. This is every third Tuesday. So this is a presentation like we're doing here, but it's once a month and it's specifically about something in the Java JVM ecosystem. This was started by Greg Bollinger, who wanted to do more talks about Java. So if there's something that you're interested in, like tonight we're going to learn about Elixir. If there's like an Elixir community in Wichita and you wanted to start a monthly or semi-monthly or quarterly Elixir event, devICT would be glad to support it. So anyone that wants to champion something like this is welcome to. So this next one, Java Talks, will be August 16th, and Jacob Moore is going to be teaching us about Kotlin, the how and the why. Next month, I'm really excited about this. This talk next month will be Scary JavaScript That Tracks You Online, and this is going to be from Luke Crouch, who's an employee of Mozilla. He runs a lot of groups down in Oklahoma. This is like I mentioned before, this is a talk that he's planning to give, or maybe is already scheduled to give, at some regional and national conferences. So he's taking it on tour to local regional groups. So he'll be here next month, August 25th. That'll be a lot of fun. I really want to get as many people out for this event as possible to show the Oklahoma community that we have a community here. So if you can make out, that'd be great. And tonight, we have Seth Etter with Elixir is Fun. Let's give Seth a hand.
Okay, so I haven't been on a Mac in a little while. This is not my machine. So, good start. So if I fuddle around, do what? Right. I mean, nothing happened. What are you talking about? So yeah, if I felt like I'm a little clumsy with the key bindings and things, I apologize. We'll get through it though. Whoops. Okay. So Elixir. There we go. So what is it? It's showing the webcam. Thank you, because that is not what I want at all. Let's do entire screen, and we're good. Add that. Okay. So what is Elixir? Elixir is a programming language. It's a very new programming language. And I will be the first to admit that new things are fun to mess with. That's kind of why I got into development, is because there's constantly new things to learn and new tools and languages and toys to play with. So in the past, I have been I've done the languages I've worked with the most were JavaScript and Ruby. And I really, really like Ruby. It's a short, succinct, expressive, and friendly syntax. It just feels good to work with. So Elixir comes from the Ruby community. So that's kind of how I heard about it and decided to dive in. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. It's also a functional language, so as opposed to an object-oriented language. There are no classes and objects, there are just modules and functions. So it's just a bunch of different functions that you group together into modules. The functional style involves just transforming data. It basically means instead of holding state within your application, you try as much as you possibly can to just think about everything you're doing as an operation where you take some kind of input, do some operations on it, and then result in some kind of output. You're not holding any kind of internal state. That way it's, the benefit of that is that it's a lot easier to reason about what's happening in your application, because when you have a function that doesn't rely on state, if you give it the same input, you're going to get the same output every single time. If you have a function that does rely on some kind of state in your application, the result may change, even giving it the same input, because the state somewhere else in the application might be different. So, the argument could be made that the functional programming style is a lot more stable because you don't have state that's messing things up. So, functional programming has been around for a really, really long time. I'm sure Tanner could probably tell you exactly how long, but I'm not sure. But it does seem to be, do what now?
Late 50s.
Late 50s, okay, so a long time, 60 years, 60 plus years. It does seem to be kind of making a comeback. You see a lot more talk about functional these days, and I think there's a number of reasons for that we won't get into right now. It's also a dynamic language, so it's not strongly typed. It does a lot of type inference, and it's also not compiled. So, well, kind of, but we'll talk about that too. But you can change things on the fly. One of the cool features of it is it has hot code swapping. You can have your application or your program running and actually change out the code for different modules and pieces of it on the fly without actually shutting the application down. Yeah, I'll talk more about that too. It also is very extensible, and this is one of the features of Ruby as well that a lot of people love. People either love it or hate it. You can kind of add new features to the language itself to where it looks like it's a kind of a core built-in feature. One of the ways of doing that is macros. So, you kind of add your own pieces of functionality and your own ways to express different types of domain logic, and then your resulting application code looks really nice and clean and expressive, and I like that. So where did it come from? I mentioned the Ruby community. A lot of the people in the Ruby community are kind of moving towards Elixir, so a lot of the Ruby ideologies have moved towards it. It was created by a guy named Jose Valim. I think I'm saying his name right. He is a Rails core team member. I'm pretty sure he's heavily a Ruby contributor as well. Smart guy. So he has given lots and lots of talks, been on lots of podcasts, wrote lots of articles. He has a lot of good things to say, so he's definitely a person to look into and follow. So what's the big deal? Why is this language any better or different than other languages? So it's very heavily inspired by Ruby, as I mentioned. It's also powered by the Erlang VM. I don't know how long Erlang has been around. I'd heard of it for a long time, but never looked into it at all. I've learned since digging into Elixir that the origin of Erlang is doing programming for telecommunication system, which have to be highly fault tolerant. You can't bring down a phone system to make some changes. So that's where the hot code swapping comes in really handy. You also have tons and tons of concurrent processes. So, parallel computing, concurrency, those are really, really high. Those are big concerns in this kind of an environment. So, and with the way that a lot of application development and software development these days is going, distributed computing is really important. So having languages and tools and VMs and systems that can handle that really well is becoming more of a priority. So if you know much about Ruby, you know that it's slow. It's quite slow. It's fast enough for most things, but compared to a lot of other languages that are out there right now, Go, even JavaScript, Ruby is considerably slower. So Elixir is blazingly fast, thanks to the Erlang VM, so that's another huge benefit. And again, it being Ruby inspired, it has that really friendly, expressive syntax that caused a lot of people to fall in love with Ruby. Now, I will say that all programming language preferences, tool preferences, all of those things, there are some objective things we can measure, but a lot of it comes down to preference. I know a lot of people who hate Ruby. I know even more people who hate JavaScript. I like both of them. So, a lot of the stuff in here will probably be of my preference and not necessarily fact, but I'll give you as many facts as I can. But again, I really enjoyed working with Ruby, so Elixir kind of carries that same thing over. I already mentioned the concurrency, and yeah, so it's just really fun to work with. To me, it's important that I enjoy the tools and languages that I'm working with, and having that balance between they get the job done well and I actually have a good time while I'm working with them. That's super important to me. This functional style was new to me at the time. That was another reason I chose to dive into it, is I wanted to learn something that was very outside of my comfort zone as a developer. I'm very familiar with the object-oriented style. I've worked in that for a long time. So being able to do something that really bent my mind a lot more was exciting to me. So I had the great Ruby syntax, new functional style, and it turned out to be a very good time. Another thing, and this is what really sold it for me. This is one of my personal top priorities when I choose my tools and languages, is the ecosystem. And when I say ecosystem, I mean the tooling, the libraries, the frameworks that exist, the community that exists around it, the articles, tutorials, guides that are put out, how easy they are to follow along, how friendly and helpful the community is, all of those things, documentation. When you've got a good ecosystem, it makes the experience even more enjoyable. So this was something I really liked about the Ruby community. While there's some bad apples as far as people go within the Ruby community, but the tooling, articles, tutorials, all that kind of stuff was always really well done, and I benefited a lot from that on multiple occasions. So how do you get started with it? Easiest place is to just go to the Elixir website, so elixir-lang.org, and if you go to install, it's got pretty straightforward instructions. So if you were here before we actually started the presentation, you probably saw us messing around with my computer. It took Jacob all of 5 minutes to get Elixir installed on his machine and be up and running. So the install instructions on this site are pretty straightforward. I won't go into them. But yeah, and again, like I said, the ecosystem is great. All the documentation, the getting started guides, everything on this site are really straightforward, really easy to follow. So my recommendation is just to start there. So what does it look like? I've talked about language features and what I like about it. So let's actually look at some code now. And this is where it might get interesting. Am I in? Cool. All right. Oh, I'm already off to a bad start. Actually, you know what we're going to do? Okay, so we've got mix, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a project, and it's going to be a really, really basic project, but I'll get to demonstrate a number of things. I'll get to demonstrate some of the tooling that exists with Elixir, such as project generation, documentation generation, automated testing. So a lot of that stuff is just built straight into the language. I don't think he likes it. It's like Elixir's for fools, write in C. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to create a new project, and I'm going to write a module that has one function in it, and it's a function that will take a list of numbers and add them all together. So pretty straightforward, but again, I'll get to demonstrate some of the interesting features of the language and a lot of the tooling that comes packaged with it, which is great. So, so there's a command line tool called mix. And we need to install a dependency here. Oh no, remind me later. Clear. Oh, it's because I'm in the, okay, never mind. So if we type mix, it should, and it's, okay. I know, but I moved out of, oh, I am still there. I need to go here. It should give me the, there we go. So here is all of the, here's all of the things that come with this mix tool. So you can start your application. Mix depths is for managing the dependencies of your project. Let's see, hex is for publishing libraries. So if you build an Elixir project that you want to publish as a library in their package management system, that's called hex. You can do that all with the mix tool. You have test, which will actually run your test. There's also some other mix extensions that you can install as dependencies with your project, such as automated documentation generation, which I'm going to show you, which is awesome. And it also just lets you start a new project. So we'll call this mix new math. Let's call it math. So we're going to cd into math. It created a new project folder here. So you can see the files that it created. It even had to get ignore for us and all those things. So go in here and let's go into them. So mix.exs is the definition of your project. Oh, this no syntax highlighting. That's going to be weird. Okay. That's okay. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here. Everybody still read that okay? Is that good? Okay. So this defines your project. we've got the name of it here, version, things like that, the Elixir version we're using. And then down here, this is where our list of dependencies go, which we don't have any yet. We're going to add one here in a little bit, but we'll get to that in just a second. So our main module is under lib. So this is math.ex. So we just got an empty module here. So like I said, this is a completely functional language. So there are there's no classes, no objects. It's just modules that hold collections of functions. And we're going to write one function here. And actually, let's do this TDD style and write a test. So we'll go into test. It already has our base test file here. So we can open this up. It's got our module created for math test. And we tell it we want to use the EX unit. EX unit is the testing library for Elixir. So, so we can go ahead and run this. Let's do EX test. So you can see it puts everything together and then runs the test. So this is a pretty straightforward test because 1 + 1 should always equal 2. So we're going to change this and say sums together a list of numbers. We're going to say assert math.sum, and we give it a list of 1, 2, and 3, and that should equal 6. So if we run that, it's going to tell us it failed because we don't have a function in our module named sum. So let's go over here. To define a function, we just say def sum do and then end. So do and end, those are, if you're familiar with Ruby, that should seem familiar. That's similar to curly braces and most other C-style languages to denote that this will be a block of code. And then our parameters will go here. So we want to accept a numbers parameter. So let's see how much closer that gets us. It returned nil. We were expecting 6. So another feature of this that also comes from the Ruby world is implicit returns. So the last line that is executed within a function is what that function will return. You don't have to actually, you can put the return statement, I believe, but it's just kind of the expected style to not do that. So, all right, so this is where it's going to get a little weird. So one of the other features of this language that it uses really heavily in how you solve problems with Elixir is called pattern matching. And what that essentially means is that we can have the same function defined multiple times with a different number of arguments that it accepts, or its different arity, and we can also match differently based on what the arguments within a specific arity look like. So I don't know if that made sense at all, but I'll show you. So what we want to do here, we're going to use a combination of pattern matching and recursion to loop through this list and add up each item as we go. So to do that, we need to write another, let's just comment this out for a second. You don't have my shortcuts. There we go. So we'll comment that out for a second, and we're going to write another version of sum, but we're going to say def p. So that means private. So this is not one that can be used outside of the module itself. And we're going to say sum this and total. Let me get rid of this. And total. Okay. So this looks a little bit weird, right? Normally when you write arguments for a function, you're not putting any kind of special syntax in there. Each function or each argument that a function accepts should just be an identifier, and that's it. But what we're able to do here is we're basically telling it with this first argument that we're expecting a list. And what we want to do is we want to immediately grab out from that list the first item and then the remaining tail of that list. So now within the body of our function, HD, which is short for head, will be will be equal to whatever the first item in that list was. And then TL, or tail, will be a list that is the remainder of the items there. So this is how we can kind of break through or loop through a list with recursion and process each item at a time, because each time we call this again with the tail, it's going to be grabbing that first item and just keep breaking it down. So what we want to do here is in our original sum function, and this is what I'm doing here, it's kind of a shorthand so we can do a single line function definition, but we want to call sum with numbers and 0. So what that's going to do is it's going to call, because it's seeing that we're calling a version of the sum function that accepts 2 parameters, it's going to know that we need to use this one instead of the first one, which only accepts 1 argument. So kind of an example of pattern matching. So then within here, what we want to do is we're going to call another version of sum, or we're going to call sum again and pass it the tail, and then we're going to say total plus head. So what this is doing is we're calling the same function again, but we're going to add the value of the head item to whatever our current total is, and then call it again with the remaining items. And then that'll keep recursing over itself until we have an empty list. However, we're going to have to do something different once that list is completely empty. So we define one more version of this function where this is the version that is called once we pass in an empty list. So once we've gone through every single item, and then we have our total, and at this point, we don't need to do anything extra, so we're just going to return the total. So, and we can, if you really want to, we can pull this up onto one line as well. So before I go further, does that make sense? Does anybody have questions about how this is operating?
Just a question about the semantics in the second function you have there. The HD and the TL, those aren't language-specific things. Those are just your identifiers, right?
Right.
Is the pipe character what's basically splitting that list?
Yes.
That's a kind of built-in thing that gives you the head on one side and then the rest of the list on the other side.
Yep, exactly. This is, processing lists in this way is really, really common in the language. So yeah, that's a built-in construct, as far as I'm aware, at least. But yeah, and like you said, these are just identifiers. We could call it head or tail. HD and TL are just, I saw that in examples, so I used that. Huh? Yes. Yes. So the question was the do colon, is that just a syntax that is specific for when you have a one-line function? And yes, it is. If it's going to be a multi-line function, when you use the colon, it basically means you can omit the end, which would otherwise be there. So otherwise, we would define it like this: do and then just say total in here. So these two things here are exactly identical. The weird, I think it's weird that you have to put the comma in there after the function or after the argument list, but that's just that's part of the syntax. If you're going to do the single line function, at least. So, any other questions before I move on? Go ahead. No? You sure? You look like you want to ask a question.
That was state to make this function.
Okay. Okay. It's going to make me look bad, huh?
No.
Go ahead.
Hierarchical destructuring. You have lists within lists.
That's a good question. Do what now? Yes, hierarchical destructuring. So lists within lists. I imagine it wouldn't be done much differently. I mean, if you need to work with a list within a list. So if this was a list of lists, head would still be equal to that first list, and then you would process it, the same way. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. So this should work. Our test should pass now. So let's do mixed test. Cool, it did. I'm not a liar. All right. This is pretty straightforward, but it's a good way to demonstrate, both pattern matching and recursion. And those are, like I said, pretty core features to the language. The next thing I want to show you is that automated documentation generation. So there is some semantic way of defining documentation on modules and functions. So if we say doc module, or is it module doc? Yeah, module doc. And then these 3 double quotes are a way of opening up like a string block, essentially. And we can say this is a module for Elixir talk. And then to do documentation on a specific function, we just do doc. And takes a list of numbers and adds them together. Okay, so that's good. You know, having the documentation within the code itself is great, but people love to actually, browse more well-formatted documentation, in a browser essentially. And I just want to show you real quick on elixirlang.org. You click on docs, go into the Elixir standard library. This is what all Elixir module documentation will look like, whether it's third party or not. Because from the beginning, they built this tool that generates documentation from the documentation that I just showed you in the code to result in a nice browsable page like this. So we can look through a bunch of different modules. We can see the summary. We can look at all of the functions. It even includes specs and tests, and you can do a lot with the documentation, which I'm not going to go too deep into. But I will show you how easy it is to add this. Let's see. I just have to grab this because I don't have it quite memorized yet. Okay. So to get that automated documentation generation, we just need to add this dependency to our mix file. So under deps, we add the exdoc module. We give it a version, and we say we only need this for our development environment. So now if we run mix deps.git, it's going to go and install exdoc. It should. Okay, so that's installed now. And now I have a new command in mix. So let's go ahead and look at our mix help here. And we should see that, let's do this. Seth, Elixir talk, yeah. Oh, okay. So if we look at mix help, now within here, we'll see that we have a new, oh, does it not list it? That's interesting. Should be there. I guess it doesn't list it in the help, so that's a little interesting. But we do have a new mix command, so mix docs. So we type this command, it pushes a bunch of things together, and then it tells us we can view our documentation at doc/index.html. We'll see if this works. Cool. So all of a sudden, just based on that little bit of documentation I put in my module, I now have this really nicely formatted and easily browsable documentation page that I can ship with my code, which is fantastic. So you don't have to go and manually create your documentation. You just write it in line, just like you would any other comments on your code, which you should be doing. Not that I always do, but it's a good practice. And this is just generated for you. And the other great thing is that any person using Elixir should be familiar with this interface for browsing documentation since it's consistent across the board. There's a lot of value in that consistency. And so you can see it has the function in here. It tells me it takes a list of numbers and adds them together. Notice that it doesn't include the versions of the function that I defined as private because nobody should need to know about those because they're just internals. They want to dig into the internals, they can open up the code itself. So yeah, so this is an awesome little tool here. So again, these are a lot of great features where you have your automated testing built in. You have documentation pretty much built in. You had one dependency, but this mix tool, along with a lot of just pre-built modules that have shipped with Elixir and were built from the get-go, make it really easy to just get up and running and have all of the things you expect to have or want to have to do your job as a developer. So again, this is something that's of really high priority for me. Again, preference, not everybody, it's not as high of a priority for everybody, but I see a lot of value in it. So any questions about that portion? Doc, go ahead.
What happens if a function call with a set of parameters matches more than one prototype?
The question was, what happens when a function is called and it matches more than one version of a function definition? I believe it will throw some kind of error, but actually, I don't think it will throw an error. It's going to match the one that's defined first. So, yeah, I'm almost positive, and we can test that real quick. Let's do that. What's going on here? So we'll have def p some. So instead of actually recursing through this list, because this version is defined afterwards, it should just return 0. So let's run mix test. Unexpected token. What did I do? Oh, yep. I'm still very new to Elixir. Hey now. So yeah, so we got 0 there. So it's just gonna throw the first one that it matches against. So yeah, so order is important. Any other questions? Okay. I'm going to show you one other example. I'm going to have to clone this down. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, so who here has heard of Advent of Code? So the idea behind Advent of Code is the Advent calendar where you have the 25 days leading up to Christmas, and there's something that happens on each one of those days. So Advent of Code, each day a new challenge was presented, and it was done in a way that it didn't matter what language or tool you used to solve it. It was just some kind of puzzle that you wrote a program to run through an input and then get some kind of answer from it. So I did the first 3 days in Advent of Code with Elixir. Then I switched to JavaScript afterwards because I was falling behind. The first one was a lot of fun though, and let's see if I can pull this up here. And these are probably your things here. Is this that's day 25, so we start at the bottom. Yeah, right here. So day 1, there's a whole story behind it. We'll skip over that for the sake of time. But the idea is Santa is going around and dealing with a large apartment building. So we have this giant input, and where can we get our input? Got to log in. Okay, that's okay. So the input, I can just show you over here, looks like this. It's just a whole bunch of parentheses that are either left parentheses or right parentheses. And the way it works is that left parenthesis means go up 1 floor, right parenthesis means go down 1 floor. So we're figuring out what floor he ends up on after going through this entire input. So the way I solved this using Elixir was I had an entry function here for floor count, and that gave the input. And this is going to be just one giant string. And then I called the private version of this that has so string.codePoints input will take all of the characters that are in the string and essentially let us process it as a list of characters. And then we're starting on floor 0. So then this is going to be really, really similar to the sum function that we just saw, and ignore these ones because that's a second part here. So what we do is we start and we're using that head and tail destructuring again, and we're opening up a condition block. So this is saying we want to do a different thing based on different conditions. So when the condition that our head is equal to a left paren, we want to call floor count with the tail. So again, just processing the next chunk of the list. And we want to do floor plus 1. So we want to go up a floor. If it's a right parenthesis, we want to go down a floor. So we do the same thing, but floor minus 1. This is also just a good practice to always have a default condition. So if there was some reason that we didn't have a left paren or a right paren, we don't want to process that as a floor change. So we just go on to the next character and pass whatever our current floor was. And then I think so. Let's find out. I think I'm in the right. Yeah, okay. We didn't want to. Yes. No condition clause evaluated to true. And I wonder if we're getting some kind of code point in there. Yes, yeah, I think that's right. So I think there's a new line at the end of the file that it doesn't know how to process. So it doesn't look like there's a compile error, but in this case, we did actually hit a point where it wasn't one of those two, and we didn't want to process it. So, and then again, once we've gone through the entire list, we just return whatever floor we're on, and that's our answer. So. Right. Well, it might check to make sure that there's some kind of default condition though of just true. But yeah, without knowing the input, if it doesn't enforce that without knowing the input, there would be no way to know. So, but again, this was just it was a lot of fun to solve problems this way because it was a lot different than what I had done traditionally, and I enjoyed it a lot. So, I have my other couple examples of the first 3 days of Advent of Code solutions on my GitHub page. So sethedder/AOC-Elixir. And you can see the day 1, 2, and 3. Day 2 is a little bit more complicated, but yeah, still a lot of fun. Okay, so that's it for code examples. So how can you learn more? I mentioned that because of the great ecosystem, there's a lot of really good learning materials out there. There's a lot of really good books, but I like free online materials as much as I can find. ElixirSchool.com is a really great one. It's pretty comprehensive. It goes through a lot of different things over here. It even has advanced topics. I didn't mention yet that you can actually use Erlang things directly from Elixir. So it talks about actually doing that, which is great. There's also elixirsips.com. I believe this is a subscription site. But it's screencasts. It's a whole bunch of very short screencasts that are, bite-sized and go through all kinds of different topics, and there's a ton of them on there now. So this is another great resource for learning if you prefer videos over books or web pages or reading in general. If you want to practice Elixir, codewars.com actually supports Elixir. So this is a site where you have community-submitted coding challenges, and you can do submissions for those challenges in a variety of languages. They support Elixir now, so you can actually practice around on there, which is great. Exorcism.io is another code practicing site, which Jacob has given a talk on before. So if you want to dig through the devICT talks, he gives an intro to this. Exorcism is awesome for learning and practicing any language. And again, Elixir is one that they support. Also, just the learning page on elixirlang.org. You just go to the Elixir website and click on Learning up at the top. It'll take you here. And it has kind of the de facto standard books that are available right now, which are all great. I've been going through Programming Elixir. the writing is great. It's easy to follow along with. They do a great job of explaining things. So again, just really high quality content here. I haven't dug into either of these, but I assume they're good. And then it has some web pages. So Elixir School, yeah, screencast sites that you can get through, more in-depth resources. This one, eTudes for Elixir, it was awesome. And now when you go to this page, it redirects to high performance browser networking, which is great. This looks really awesome too, but I don't think it has anything to do with Elixir. So that's unfortunate. I think it's an O'Reilly book though, so I think you can pick this up from O'Reilly somewhere. I'm sure it's floating around the internet somewhere at least. Metaprogramming, which is another big topic in Elixir, just like it was in Ruby. Erlang and Anger. Not sure about that one. Sounds fun though. But yeah, these are all great resources for learning more. And yeah, that's all I have. So are there any questions, comments, concerns?
Comment, you mentioned high level of concurrency and that Erlang Elixir is functional. Probably worth underscoring that this is the antithesis of multi-threading, because when one has multi-threading, essentially all the globals, all the heap, all the stack is stored with per process state, which is why certain server processes that are multi-threaded end up being such memory pigs, is because they have to hold on to an entire heap as they're working, instead of just do what's possible with as little memory as needed and be done with it. So
right. So yeah,
is definitely at odds with threading, you could say.
Yeah, absolutely. So the comment was that traditionally, concurrent programming is done with a lot of different threads, and threads can be very heavy because they're holding their own heap, their own internal state, and so they end up being kind of monstrous and non-performant, correct? Yeah, and so the way that Erlang handles this, and by association Elixir, is the Erlang VM uses what they call them processes, or PIDs, PIDs, and they're really, really, really lightweight processes, which you can kind of think of as threads, but they're not carrying around this gigantic heap of memory and state like a thread would be. It's, from what I've read, I haven't done anything like this, but from what I've read, it's not uncommon for a typical machine to be able to spin up 1 million of these PIDs within the Erlang VM. So again, it lets you do very, very high concurrency applications. So anything else? Okay, well, that's all I have. Yeah, go ahead.
Support like a asynchronous type syntax, or if you have a function that you know is going to take a long time?
Yes. So I believe as a disclaimer, I haven't gone really, really deep with the language, so I may not be speaking completely accurately. The question was, does it support an asynchronous style of programming? So if you have a function that's going to take a long time, how do you do that? From what I understand, that's something that you would use PIDs for. You would spawn up a process, or a PID as they call it in Elixir, and have it off doing something, and you can listen for messages from that. So whenever it's done doing its thing, it will spit out a message, and then you have something back in your main application that would listen for that message and then do something as a result. So that would be how you would handle asynchronous operations. So anything else? Yes?
So in your augmented code example, it kind of looked like you were calling the function from within itself.
Yes, yes.
So can you get like stuck in there, or does it just come out?
Technically you could. So the question was about how I'm calling the function from within itself. That is an example of recursion, which basically means the function calls itself, and technically that would result in an infinite loop. So we have to have some way, some condition that it would break out of that loop. And that's what this last definition here is for. So you'll notice that these two versions of the function take the same number of arguments. But the first argument and this one, we're expecting there to be a head and a tail. In the last version of this function, we're expecting it to be an empty list. So whenever, each time we call this, we're taking one item off the beginning and processing it and then calling that function again with the remainder of the list. So we're calling it over and over, but the list is getting shorter and shorter over time until we've processed every single item. And at that point, we're calling it with an empty list, at which point it calls this version of the function. That's when we break out of the loop and then return whatever the result of what we were doing was.
And looking at the syntax plus keeping in mind compiler design, I would almost bet money, I don't know for a fact, but I would almost bet money that there's some sort of tail call optimization going on, and this just essentially, instead of having actual function calls, gets rewritten as a simple map reduce without blowing through the stack. I would guess, but I don't know.
I also don't know for a fact. That sounds reasonable, but I don't know enough about compiler design to say for sure. The comment was that based on the syntax and general compiler design, it's very likely that there is some tail optimizations going on, so that internally it's using more of a map reduce style as opposed to just individually calling each item. Did I say that correctly? Okay, just want to make sure I get that for the audience or for the remote viewers. But yeah, that seems reasonable. I honestly don't know enough to say for sure. But yep.
Are parameters passed by value or passed by reference?
Passed by value. Tanner, take it away. the question was, are the arguments passed by reference or passed by value? I'm going to try to answer this, and then I would love it if Tanner would correct me. Tanner knows a ton about functional programming, so he's actually doing a series of workshops right now called Functional Works. So if anybody's interested in that, join the Functional Works channel on Slack. I believe it's passed by value, because the idea in functional programming is that you're never mutating state. So once you define a variable, which there's actually some interesting things about the language that I didn't go into. Yeah, I'll just stop right there. So you can never change a value once it's defined. Let's see. So once you pass a value into a function, it's only being dealt with within that function. And that has a lot, I mean, that's in line with the functional style of never manipulating outside state. If it was passed by reference, the implication would be that we're changing the value of something that exists within another call stack or another function or somewhere else in the application, which would be state. The only reason we would need to do that is if we were trying to maintain state somewhere else. So when it's functional, we can just always pass by value because we shouldn't be worrying about state somewhere else in the application. We should just be transforming data. So if I had to guess, I would say it's pretty much always passed by value. There may be a little more complicated version of that answer as far as like how the internals are actually working though. Anything else? All right, thank you guys, I appreciate it. Well, yeah, we can talk more afterwards.